He beat up a pregnant woman right on the street, but he didn't know who her friend was. A few minutes later, everything changed. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching this video. The sun in Long Beach was beginning its slow descent behind rows of aging palm trees and weary rooftops when Tiffany James stepped out of Hector's Market. A canvas tote filled with kale, oranges, and almond milk slung over her shoulder. Her belly, prominent beneath a soft cream sweater, moved gently with every step, a quiet reminder that life stirred within. At 7 months pregnant, she was used to the stares, the smiles, and the occasional unsolicited comment from strangers. Today, though, no one said anything, just the gentle rustle of plastic, the squeaking of a shopping cart behind her, and the warmth of California's late afternoon brushing against her cheeks. Tiffany walked slowly, favoring her right foot, which had begun to ache midway through her day. She'd spent the last several hours mentoring teens at the Campbell Village Youth Center, guiding a group of at-risk girls through a workshop on personal agency and conflict resolution. It was her element, standing before young minds, speaking truths she herself had clawed through years of hardship to learn. She believed in transformation, in the promise that every child, no matter how troubled, could be steered toward light. That belief kept her going, even when her own world felt heavy with uncertainty. She paused at the corner of Pine Street and 14th Avenue, waiting for the pedestrian signal. A soft buzz came from her phone. It was a text from Ronda. "You okay? Haven't heard from you today. Need anything?" Tiffany smiled and began to type a reply, her thumbs sluggish but precise. "All good. Just left the market. Heading home. Baby kicking like crazy. Hello." That was when she heard the voice. "Hey, you. Step away from the curb." Tiffany looked up. A white police officer was approaching from across the intersection, his right hand resting on the butt of his holstered firearm. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sunburned skin and an expression that didn't invite questions. She hesitated, confused. "I said, step away from the curb," he repeated, louder this time, his boots clacking against the pavement. "I'm just waiting for the light," Tiffany replied, her voice calm, careful. She'd worked in community outreach long enough to know that tone could be the difference between de-escalation and disaster. "What's in the bag?" the officer asked, gesturing with his chin. "Groceries," she answered, holding it up slightly. "From Hector's." "ID?" His eyes scanned her slowly, lingering for a moment too long on her stomach. "Sir, I haven't done anything," she said, instinctively reaching into her purse. "Here's my faculty badge. I work at LBCC. I'm just heading home." But the officer's expression had already shifted from inquiry to irritation. He stepped closer, his voice tightening. "Ma'am, I gave you a lawful order. I need you to sit on the curb." "I'm pregnant," Tiffany said, backing slightly. "Sitting like that isn't safe for me or the baby." "You refusing to comply?" he barked. "I'm not refusing. I'm just asking for—" Before she could finish, the officer grabbed her by the upper arm. Tiffany gasped, dropping the tote bag. Oranges rolled into the street. She stumbled, but kept her balance, clutching her belly. "Hey, I'm not resisting. I'm pregnant." A crowd had begun to gather. A couple across the street stopped mid-step. A young man pulled out his phone and hit record. A mother with 2 children clutched her daughter's hand and slowly moved away. No one intervened. The officer shoved Tiffany backward. Her back hit the side of his patrol SUV. The metallic thud seemed to echo louder than it should have. She cried out, her arms flailing for balance. "Put your hands behind your back," he growled. "I can't. Please, I'm pregnant." Then came the moment that would replay in countless homes on millions of phones. The officer lifted his boot and drove it into Tiffany's midsection. She crumpled. Not immediately. First came the gasp, the sound of air being yanked from her lungs, then the collapse. Her knees gave out, arms wrapping around her stomach as she fell to her side on the concrete. Her face was a portrait of disbelief and agony. Screams erupted from the onlookers. A woman shouted, "She's pregnant, you psycho!" A teenage boy sprinted toward the officer but stopped short, frozen in panic. Tiffany writhed on the ground, clutching her abdomen, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. "Help me," she whispered, barely audible. "Please." The officer stood over her, breathing heavily. He didn't reach for his radio. He didn't kneel to check on her. Instead, he barked to the crowd, "Back up! Everyone back the hell up!" A voice from the crowd, "We're filming, man. We saw everything." "You want to get arrested too?" the officer snapped. Tiffany tried to move but couldn't. A warm sensation spread across her lower belly. Her mind, once clear and composed, dissolved into panic. Was the baby okay? Was she bleeding internally? Was this how it ended? A hand reached into her coat pocket, trembling, desperate. Her phone. She unlocked it with shaky fingers, opened the contact list, and hit the emergency name at the top, Ronda R. But her vision was dimming. Her hand went slack. The phone slid from her grip, skittering across the concrete. It was picked up by someone, a gray-haired woman with wire-rimmed glasses and trembling hands. "Hello?" she said into the phone. Yes, I'm here. Your friend's hurt. He kicked her. He kicked her in the stomach. You have to come. Hurry. It's Pine and 14th. Hurry." Sirens began to wail in the distance, too far to matter now. Tiffany's head lolled to one side. Her eyes fluttered, catching the fading light as it danced between tree branches above. She wanted to fight. She wanted to scream. She wanted to protect the tiny life inside her. But all she could do was whisper one last time, "Help me." The crowd closed in, but no one dared step forward. The officer stood still, expression unreadable, a badge on his chest that gleamed in the dying sunlight. And far across town, a phone call was answered by someone who would not stand still. Someone who would not stay silent. Ronda Rousey was on her way. The gym smelled of chalk, sweat, and leather, a scent that had become as familiar to Ronda as the weight of her own fists. The afternoon session at Legends MMA had run long. A group of teenage girls, each carrying her own invisible burdens, had stayed behind after class to ask questions, linger, and laugh nervously at Ronda's stories about her days in the cage. She gave them her full attention, correcting their footwork, refining their stance, reminding them that their bodies were not liabilities, but weapons, shields, and homes. By the time she closed the doors behind them and collapsed onto the padded bench beside her duffel bag, the sun outside had dipped low, casting golden streaks across the mat. She pulled off her wraps, massaging the tension from her wrists when the phone buzzed. Not a chirp, not a ping. It rang, an actual phone call, which was rare. Ronda glanced at the screen. It was Tiffany's number. Her thumb hovered over the answer button, and something, a barely there tug in her gut, whispered that this wasn't normal. Tiffany didn't call. She texted, and even then, usually in the evenings after tea and baby books. Ronda pressed answer. At first, there was only chaos, screaming, wind, a distant voice yelling, "Stay down!" And then the shaky voice of an older woman. "Hello? Is this Ronda? Your friend? Your friend's hurt. He kicked her. He kicked her in the stomach. You have to come. Please. Pine and 14th. Hurry. Hurry." The line went dead. Ronda was already standing. Her training hoodie was on in seconds, her gloves stuffed hastily into the bag. She didn't need to think, didn't need to strategize. Every muscle moved with precision. Her helmet was strapped on before she cleared the front door. The black Kawasaki bike roared beneath her as she sped out of the gym's parking lot and into the streets of Long Beach. The wind against her face did little to cool the fire surging through her chest. Her mind tried to piece together the fragments. Tiffany. Pregnant. Hurt. Kicked. A cop. She gripped the throttle tighter, weaving between cars, heart pounding not with fear, but with rising fury. The same fury that once fueled her in every titled defense, that rose when an opponent tried to humiliate her, that surged when people underestimated her. But this wasn't about her. This was about Tiffany. She remembered the first time they met, standing shoulder to shoulder at a domestic violence fundraiser. Tiffany had been speaking on behalf of survivors, sharing her story with poise and compassion. Ronda had followed with a demonstration of self-defense techniques. They were from different worlds, one built from intellect and education, the other from grit and combat, but they connected instantly. Tiffany had told her, "If I ever need someone in my corner, I want it to be you." Ronda had replied without hesitation, "Then you'll never be alone." Now, racing toward the intersection of Pine and the 14th, those words echoed louder than ever. She spotted the flashing lights first, red and blue reflections against storefront windows, spinning silently like cruel beacons. Then the crowd gathered in a wide semicircle around a patrol SUV. And at the center of it, lying on the pavement, was Tiffany. Ronda's stomach dropped. She pulled to the curb, cut the engine, and dismounted in one fluid motion. Her boots hit the asphalt hard. She dropped her helmet onto the bike seat without looking back and pushed through the crowd. The murmurs parted for her like a tide. Someone whispered her name, Dot. Another gasped. But her focus was absolute. Her eyes locked onto Tiffany, curled in on herself, a hand pressed weakly against her belly, skin pale beneath the golden hue of the setting sun. Her face twisted in pain. Her lips moved, forming Ronda's name. Beside her stood a tall, stocky white officer, his uniform tight across his chest, a scowl etched into his face. His hand still rested on the holster at his hip, and his stance, legs wide, chest puffed, was not one of concern, but of control. Ronda stepped between him and Tiffany without a word. Her presence was immediate, solid. She knelt beside her friend. "I'm here," she said, brushing Tiffany's hair back from her forehead. "I've gotcha." Tiffany tried to speak but winced. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. "She needs medical attention," Ronda called out sharply, turning her head toward the bystanders. "Where's the ambulance?" "They're on their way," someone replied. "You need to step away from her," the officer barked. "This is a police matter." Ronda stood slowly, rising to her full height. She turned to face him, eyes level, voice low and dangerous. "A police matter? You kicked a pregnant woman. You left her on the ground. That's not policing, that's assault. I gave her lawful orders. She refused to comply. She couldn't comply. She's pregnant, not a threat." "You're interfering with an active investigation," he said, moving his hand closer to the taser on his belt. The tension in the air thickened like a thundercloud. The crowd grew silent, sensing the shift. Phones came up again, red recording dots blinking like signals in the dusk. Ronda took one step forward. "If you draw that weapon," she said, voice steel, "you better be ready to use it." The officer's fingers twitched. He was out of his depth, but too proud to admit it. He sneered, shifting his stance, and in that moment, Ronda moved. She closed the distance in a blur, knocking his arm aside before he could unclip the taser. She used his own momentum against him, hooking his leg with her foot and driving him down with a swift, calculated throw. He hit the pavement with a grunt, the wind knocked out of him. Before he could recover, she was on him, not with fists, not with rage, but with precision. She pinned his arm, twisted it behind his back, and applied pressure until a sharp crack echoed across the street. The crowd gasped. The officer howled. Ronda released him, standing over him with a calmness that belied the storm in her chest. "You don't get to brutalize women and hide behind a badge," she said. The sirens arrived seconds later, 2 squad cars and an ambulance. Other officers jumped out, hands on weapons, until they recognized who she was. One of them hesitated, lowering his stance. Is that Ronda Rousey?" She turned toward them, her hoodie dark with sweat, eyes blazing. "She's hurt. She needs help. Now." Paramedics rushed in. Ronda stepped aside, watching as they gently lifted Tiffany onto a stretcher, secured her, and loaded her into the ambulance. One of the EMTs offered a reassuring nod. "She's stable, but we'll need to monitor her closely." Ronda exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The officer she had subdued was still on the ground, cradle in his arm, cursing under his breath. Another cop approached Ronda, handcuffs at the ready, but was halted by his partner. "Are you really going to arrest her? After what we just saw? She stopped a woman from losing her baby, and we're all on camera." The officer with the cuffs paused, then slowly backed off. Ronda turned to the crowd. Dozens of phones pointed at her. She didn't care. "She's my friend," she said simply. "I did what any of you should have done." And then she walked toward her bike, hands still shaking, heart still pounding. She didn't ride off, not yet. She waited, eyes on the ambulance as it pulled away, carrying Tiffany and her unborn child toward safety. Tonight, justice had begun with a phone call, but it was far from over. Ronda didn't sleep that night. She sat in a stiff hospital chair just outside Tiffany's room, elbows on her knees, fingers laced, eyes fixed on the dim strip of light beneath the door. Inside, Tiffany lay sedated, an IV taped to her wrist and monitors quietly blinking around her. The baby's heartbeat, strong, consistent, rhythmic, played like a distant drumbeat through the wall, a pulse of defiance. Ronda had heard it once, just after the paramedics confirmed the fetus had survived the trauma. It was the sound that finally allowed her to unclench her fists. But rest would not come. Her phone buzzed almost non-stop. Messages poured in. Journalists, friends, strangers. Hashtags with her name trended on social media. Video of her taking down the officer had already reached over 6 million views. There were split-screen analyses on cable news, memes, and debates raging in the comments sections of every major outlet. Some hailed her as a hero. Others, predictably, painted her as a criminal, a thug, a washed-up fighter looking for relevance. Ronda didn't care. Not now. Sometime near dawn, a soft voice called her name. She looked up. A nurse stood at the door, holding it half open. "She's awake," the nurse said gently. "She's asking for you." Inside, Tiffany looked pale but alert. Her hands rested over the curve of her stomach. Her eyes, dark and wide, found Ronda's as she entered and immediately filled with tears. "I thought I lost her," she whispered. "You didn't," Ronda replied, crossing the room and kneeling beside the bed. "She's strong, like her mama." Tiffany let out a shaky laugh. They said I was lucky. The position she was in probably saved her, but they found bruising, cramping. They need to monitor me for at least a week. Then we stay, Ronda said, as long as it takes. Silence fell between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of shared trauma, a moment between women who had both seen something terrible and survived it. But Ronda's mind was already elsewhere. The fight wasn't over. In many ways, it had just begun. By noon, the hospital room had turned into a makeshift command center. Ronda sat with Tiffany's laptop, combing through news clips, recording timestamps from multiple angles of the incident, downloading copies of the videos that flooded TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. She began to catalog them meticulously. Some showed the kick. Others, the bystanders' outrage. The clearest ones captured her takedown of the officer, offensive to some, justified to others, but undeniably effective. Next came the witnesses. Several bystanders who had filmed the event began to reach out. A young man named Corey, who worked at a vape shop across the street, sent her the full footage from his phone, including the audio of the old woman's 911 call. A middle-aged mother named Jasmine emailed her a statement. "I was there with my daughter. I saw what he did. I'll testify if needed." People were scared, but not silent. Ronda knew this window wouldn't last. Public interest was a flash fire. If they didn't act now, the system would swallow the story whole and spit out a version where Tiffany was the threat and Officer Jared Hartley was the victim. She called Marcus Banks, a civil rights attorney who had once represented her cousin in a racial profiling case. Marcus didn't hesitate. "I've already seen the video," he said. "This isn't going away quietly. But you and Tiffany need to be ready for the dirt. They'll go after her first, then you." "Let them," Ronda said. "We're not hiding." "Good," Marcus replied, "because I'm bringing in help. We're going federal with this." Later that evening, Tiffany was resting again. Ronda sat at the edge of the hospital bed, arms crossed, staring at the muted television screen where a news anchor repeated the phrase, "Citizen vigilante," with increasing theatricality. She turned it off. "I want to press charges," Tiffany said suddenly, her voice hoarse but steady. Ronda turned to her. "We will. Not just against him. Against the whole damn department." It began with an official complaint. Marcus helped draft the language carefully. It outlined the events in detail, the threat to Tiffany's life and her unborn child, the refusal to provide medical assistance, and the unnecessary escalation. Attached were the videos, witness statements, and Tiffany's medical records. The response from the Long Beach Police Department was swift and predictably defensive. "We are aware of the incident involving Officer Jared Hartley and are conducting an internal review," their press release read. "We take all allegations of misconduct seriously and are committed to transparency and accountability." But Ronda knew the language well. It was vague, non-committal, the kind of statement designed to pacify headlines without admitting guilt. And most telling of all, Hartley had not been suspended, not even placed on leave. The next morning, a reporter from the Los Angeles Chronicle arrived outside the hospital, asking for a comment. Ronda agreed, but insisted it be live. She stood on the front steps, dressed in gym clothes, hair pulled back, no makeup. The camera rolled. "My name is Ronda Rousey," she said. "Yesterday, I stopped a police officer from killing my friend. Tiffany James is a teacher, a mentor, and a mother. She was brutalized in broad daylight by someone sworn to protect her. She did not resist. She did not threaten. And yet, she was treated like a criminal because of the color of her skin and the shape of her body. She paused, eyes burning. And I need every person watching this to ask themselves, what would you have done? Would you have walked away? Would you have filmed and said nothing? Or would you have stepped in? The clip went viral within hours. Other athletes began to speak out. A WNBA player reposted it. Then an Olympic gymnast. Then a former Marine. Public opinion began to swell. The hashtag #JusticeForTiffany trended globally. But the pushback came just as fast. Right-wing commentators accused Ronda of assaulting an officer. A smear article surfaced suggesting Tiffany had a history of resisting authority, based on a single parking ticket from 5 years ago. A local radio host questioned whether the pregnancy was even real. Ronda nearly threw her phone through the wall. "They're trying to bait you," Marcus warned. "They'll keep poking until you snap, and if you do, they win." "I won't snap," Ronda said coldly. "I'll focus." Together, they built a public pressure campaign. Ronda launched a petition demanding Officer Hartley's termination and the immediate suspension of any officer with unresolved complaints of excessive force. She published a list of reforms: mandatory body cams, civilian review boards, mental health screenings. The petition reached 100,000 signatures in 3 days. Meanwhile, Marcus filed a motion to obtain Hartley's internal records. What they found was damning. 5 previous complaints of excessive force, all against Black or Latino civilians. 2 settled quietly. 3 marked unfounded. No disciplinary actions, no red flags. Nothing that prevented him from continuing to patrol the streets. "This is systemic," Marcus said. "Hartley's just one cog." "And now the whole machine's going to feel us," Ronda replied. Their next move was bold. A public town hall streamed live with Ronda, Tiffany, Marcus, and several community leaders. They presented the evidence, named the patterns, and called on the district attorney to open an independent investigation. The pressure worked. By the end of the week, Hartley was placed on administrative leave. The mayor issued a statement expressing grave concern, and the district attorney confirmed that a review had been opened into both the incident and the department's handling of complaints. But none of that changed what had already happened. Ronda returned to the hospital every day. She brought books, snacks, and updates. Tiffany slowly regained her strength. The baby's heartbeat remained strong. Sometimes they cried, sometimes they laughed, but always they planned. The night before Tiffany was discharged, Ronda sat beside her in the quiet room, watching the monitor's pulse in steady rhythm. "We're not done," she said. Tiffany nodded. "Not even close." Ronda leaned back, stretching her sore shoulders. "We made the first push," she murmured. "Now comes the war." The air was thick outside City Hall as hundreds of people crowded into Lincoln Square, a long-forgotten park now overflowing with signs, chants, and camera flashes. A week had passed since Ronda's public declaration on the hospital steps, and in that time the quiet unrest that buzzed just beneath the surface of Long Beach had surged into something undeniable. The street where Tiffany James had collapsed had become a landmark of outrage. A mural now covered the nearby wall. Tiffany's face haloed in warm colors, a hand protectively resting on her belly, the words, "We saw you," etched above her head. Flowers appeared daily at the base. Candles burned into the night. There were no riots, no broken windows, no chaos. But there was fire in the people's eyes. The city had awakened. Inside City Hall, the mayor sat behind a polished oak table, flanked by aides and police brass. His face, usually relaxed and smug from years of easy re-elections, was drawn tight with strain. He had watched the videos, he had read the statements, and he had received phone calls from people he never expected to hear from: senators, donors, even entertainment executives. The name Ronda Rousey had become synonymous not with cage fighting, but civic reckoning. That morning, she had entered the building not as a guest but as a force. Dressed simply in black jeans and a denim jacket, her hair tied back, she sat beside Tiffany, who walked slowly with the aid of a cane and a nurse, her pregnancy more delicate now, her spine curved slightly from the trauma. Marcus Banks sat at their side, documents in one hand, a quiet fury in his chest. When the mayor opened the floor, he began with vague platitudes, words like accountability, tragedy, and review, until Ronda leaned forward and spoke, not with volume, but with precision. "Stop," she said, her voice sharp and clipped. "You've had a week. You've seen the evidence. You've ignored the previous complaints. Officer Hartley assaulted a pregnant woman and left her on the ground to bleed. What are you going to do about it?" There was silence. The cameras caught every second. "We've opened an independent review," the mayor said finally. "Officer Hartley is on leave." "That's not enough," Tiffany said, her voice softer but firmer. "I'm still pregnant. I'm still recovering, but I wake up every night hearing his voice. He's not on leave in my mind. He's still right there." Across the room, a man in uniform shifted uncomfortably. Chief Donovan, the police commissioner, cleared his throat. "This department does not condone brutality, but we must allow the process to—" "No," Ronda interrupted. "The process protects your own. The process erased 5 previous complaints. The process failed to prevent what happened to Tiffany. So no, Chief, we're not trusting the process." It wasn't just rhetoric. Marcus distributed printed reports detailing Hartley's complaint history, internal emails leaked by a whistleblower showing clear knowledge of his behavior, and a troubling spreadsheet highlighting over 30 unresolved use-of-force allegations in the department, 28 of which involved Black or Latino civilians. The press took it all. Cameras clicked. Journalists whispered to each other, tweeting in real time. Within minutes, it was national news. That night, Tiffany appeared on Nightline with Ronda beside her. The interview was careful, emotional, and devastating. Tiffany recounted the entire incident from her own perspective. The coldness in the officer's eyes, the feel of her body hitting the ground, the terror that her baby would die before even taking her first breath. Ronda added only what needed to be said, backing every point with facts, but always directing the light back to Tiffany. In the days that followed, the city's temperature changed. The mayor's office announced the formation of a civilian oversight committee. A community hotline was launched for reporting officer misconduct. The city council scheduled an emergency session to discuss proposed reforms, mandatory body cameras, the publishing of disciplinary records, the removal of arbitration clauses that shielded officers from accountability. But not everyone applauded. Thinly veiled threats began arriving in Ronda's inbox. Photos of her house from across the street. Messages that said things like, "We're watching," or "Know your place." Anonymous voicemails laced with venom and misogyny. She showed them to Marcus. "They're scared," he said. "They should be," she replied. Still, Ronda increased her vigilance. She stayed close to Tiffany, who had moved in temporarily with a trusted friend. They never traveled alone. Security cameras were installed at the gym, but none of it slowed them down. Then came the real breakthrough. Marcus received confirmation that the Department of Justice had officially opened a federal investigation, not just into Hartley, but into patterns and practices within the Long Beach Police Department. It was the kind of win that rarely came without blood, sweat, and scandal. But now, with the nation watching, Long Beach had been pulled into the center of a broader reckoning. Meanwhile, the court battle loomed. Ronda spent late nights reviewing case files, assisting Marcus in organizing witness testimony, compiling medical expert opinions. They decided to file a dual suit, one civil, one criminal. The civil suit named the city, the department, and Officer Hartley, citing violation of civil rights, emotional distress, and attempted fetal homicide. The criminal case demanded assault charges with aggravating factors. Marcus predicted a brutal legal fight, but Ronda, for the first time in a long while, felt no fear. She was fighting for someone who couldn't fight back that day. She was fighting for every woman told to sit down and be quiet, for every black mother feared and dismissed, for every bystander who had been too afraid to move. This wasn't about a headline. It wasn't even about her reputation anymore. One morning, Ronda visited the mural. She stood quietly in front of it, hands in her jacket pockets, eyes scanning the face of her friend rendered in soft pastel. Behind her, she heard footsteps. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said a young woman beside her. "My cousin painted it. Said she wanted the world to remember." Ronda nodded. "They will." The woman tilted her head. "You gonna stop now?" Ronda turned slowly. "No," she said. "Now we start moving forward." 2 days later, at a citywide rally, Ronda and Tiffany stood on a stage before over 1,000 people. Tiffany spoke first, her voice shaken but resolute. She talked about hope, about survival, about the baby still kicking inside her. She spoke about pain, not as something to run from, but as something that demanded to be turned into purpose. Then Ronda stepped forward. Her speech was short. "They wanted us to disappear, but here we are. They wanted silence. Instead, they gave us a microphone. They tried to stop one woman on a sidewalk, but what they got was all of us." The crowd roared. Somewhere in the distance, the police chief watched the stream on a screen in his office, the knot in his stomach tightening. He could feel the walls closing in, and in a courtroom not far away, a date was quietly set for the arraignment of Officer Jared Hartley. The reckoning was no longer on its way. It had arrived. The courtroom was packed. It wasn't just the expected media swarm or the rows of lawyers flipping through binders. There were students in pressed shirts from Tiffany's college, mothers with toddlers clutched against their sides, veterans, teachers, ministers, former fighters, and young women who had never before seen a gavel hit its block in person. They filled the gallery, shoulder to shoulder, silent but immovable. Outside, hundreds more stood beneath a sea of handmade signs and banners as drones buzzed overhead and reporters gave live updates. They had come not just for a trial, but for a reckoning. Inside, Ronda sat beside Tiffany, who now carried herself with the tempered strength of someone who had survived what most would not. Her stomach, rounder than before, shifted subtly beneath a loose-fitting dress. Each movement from the child within her was a quiet act of resistance, a heartbeat pounding against a system that had tried to crush it before birth. The trial of Officer Jared Hartley had begun. He sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, no longer in uniform but in a stiff charcoal suit, his arm still healing from the injury Ronda had inflicted during the confrontation. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, eyes darting to avoid the cameras. Gone was the swagger of the man who had stood over Tiffany with impunity. In its place sat a man cornered by truth, drowning in the weight of his own actions. The prosecution opened with clarity and restraint, allowing the videos to speak for themselves. The footage of Hartley kicking Tiffany in the stomach played on the large screen. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The sound had been preserved, even enhanced for clarity. Tiffany's scream, the thud of her body hitting concrete, the crowd's disbelief, the calm voice of the woman calling Ronda's name. Next came the testimonies: Corey from the vape shop, Jasmine the mother, the nurse who had treated Tiffany in the emergency room. Each one wove a fuller tapestry of brutality and neglect. Then came the medical testimony, where doctors explained the extent of Tiffany's internal injuries, the risk of miscarriage, and the measures taken to preserve the pregnancy. They described the emotional trauma in precise, clinical terms, leaving no room for ambiguity. Marcus delivered his closing remarks with the practiced weight of a man who knew every syllable would echo far beyond the courthouse. You've seen the evidence, you've heard the stories. Officer Hartley didn't make a mistake. He made a choice. A choice to see this black woman not as a human being, not as a mother-to-be, not as a citizen, but as a threat. And for that choice, there must be accountability. When the verdict came, guilty of aggravated assault under color of law, the room did not erupt. There was no cheer, just a long, collective breath, as if the entire city had been holding it for weeks, unsure if justice still lived within the walls of the institutions meant to deliver it. Hartley was sentenced to 7 years in state prison with no possibility of early release. It wasn't the maximum, but it was real, tangible, a signal. Tiffany wept quietly, Ronda's arm around her shoulders. Later that week, they stood before the same mural that had grown now into a towering portrait, no longer just of Tiffany, but of her and Ronda together, hand in hand, with the child in Tiffany's belly drawn in faint glowing light. Flowers still lined the base, but now there were letters too, from women across the country, survivors of police violence, mothers who had feared leaving their homes, girls who had watched the trial and seen themselves, not as victims, but as worth fighting for. Ronda's foundation, Protect Her First, launched its first national initiative days after the verdict. It provided legal aid to pregnant women wrongfully detained or assaulted by law enforcement. Self-defense workshops rolled out in 5 cities, with plans for more. Medical partnerships were forged with clinics to provide trauma-informed care for women like Tiffany. The gym where Ronda trained reopened its doors to new classes, but they looked different now. Not just fighting stances and grappling. Women sat in circles after training, sharing stories, healing, building a network that stretched far beyond the padded mats. 1 month after the trial, the mayor, under public pressure, announced the resignation of Police Chief Donovan. A civilian review board, proposed by Ronda and Marcus, was approved by City Council. Transparency initiatives were passed. Body cameras became mandatory. Officers with repeated use of force complaints would now be automatically placed under suspension pending third-party investigation. Tiffany gave birth in early fall under quiet lights with her hand in Ronda's. The baby girl arrived strong and full of breath, wailing in protest the moment she was placed on her mother's chest. They named her Grace. The media had already retreated by then. The hashtags had begun to slow. But for those who had lived through it, the movement didn't fade. It evolved. Grace became a symbol not of trauma, but of transformation. At the baby's naming ceremony, a small gathering of close friends and supporters gathered in a garden behind the community center where Tiffany once mentored teens. There was no press, no microphones, just sunlight, laughter, and the weightless joy of a child who had made it. Rhonda stood quietly beside Tiffany as the baby was passed from hand to hand, eyes wide at a world that had nearly failed her before she was even born. "I meant it, you know," Tiffany said, cradling Grace again. "Meant what?" Rhonda asked. "When I said you'd be in our lives forever." Rhonda smiled, tears welling behind the strength she so carefully wore. "Then let's make forever count." They returned home to a city still healing but no longer asleep. Rhonda's face would fade from headlines, replaced by the next crisis, the next controversy. But the work continued. The classes, the reforms, the testimonies. Grace grew beneath their watchful eyes as more women joined the cause, trained, spoke out, stood up. And somewhere in another city, on another street, a woman whispered Rhonda's name as she found her strength again. Because when one woman fights, others remember how. When one mother survives, others know they can. And when justice shows up not in a courtroom, but in the arms of those willing to catch you when you fall, the world changes. One kick had tried to silence them, but they had answered with a movement. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out the next video. You won't want to miss what's coming. And share this video with someone who needs to see it.